Welcome to class, students. I'm so glad you're all in attendance because today's video is one you do not want to miss. This is video number 273 of the entire menopause education. And for the last 20 videos, I've been giving you management options for preventing Alzheimer's disease. As you can see, this is a huge unit, and that's because Alzheimer's is a huge disease that we all want to avoid. So far, I've covered lifestyle, dietary, vitamin, mineral, and supplement, and herbal options for preventing Alzheimer's. And now it's time to discuss the hormonal medication options. What you've discovered thus far is that lifestyle measures can have a huge impact on prevention of Alzheimer's, but they aren't easy. Dietary measures can also have a significant impact on prevention of Alzheimer's, but it takes knowing the facts and avoiding the fads. Vitamin, mineral, and supplement options have no ability to prevent Alzheimer's, and herbal options have no ability to prevent Alzheimer's. So at this point, you might be whining and wondering if there's anything that is certain and easy for preventing Alzheimer's. And the answer is yes, there is. And that's what we'll discuss in this video. In my book, you'll find this information in chapter 33 under the heading Hormonal Medication Options in both the first edition and the second edition. If you're wondering why you should bother watching this video, it's because it could be the very thing that induces you to do something that can really preserve your brain without any effort on your part. You know, people love quick fixes these days. So if you like the idea of saving your brain before it's too late, keep watching this video. If you've been watching these videos in order, you already know that there's an inextricable connection between estrogen and your brain. I've explained this in a number of different ways in a number of different videos. In this Alzheimer's unit alone, video 249 was on the effects of estrogen and progesterone on your brain. In it, I walked you through your hormonal life so that you would understand how your brain changes as a result of estrogen and progesterone. So I mapped out puberty, menstrual cycles, perimenopause, and postmenopause to show you what's happening to your estrogen during each of those phases of your life. And you learned that the big ticket hormone for your brain is estrogen, not progesterone. And invariably, the times when you feel your brain works the best are when your estrogen is highest. And it's the very best if your estrogen is high, but your progesterone is not. And that's because estrogen makes your thinking crisp, while progesterone makes it dull. Then, in video number 250, I talked about the effects of estrogen loss at postmenopause on your brain. There, you learned that your brain has estrogen receptor sites that need estrogen in order to function. If they don't get the estrogen they need, they starve, just like you would if you didn't get the food you need. And I pointed out the fact that one of the most common and most significant symptoms of losing your estrogen at postmenopause is menofog, fuzzy brain, brain fog, brain drain, forgetfulness, whatever you want to call it. You also learned that just as estrogen loss causes bone loss, it also causes brain loss. So there is no denying this absolute connection between estrogen and your brain. And then, in video number 251, I taught you about the effect of different types of menopause on your risk for Alzheimer's. And there, you learned that the earlier your menopause, the higher your risk of Alzheimer's. So women who have premature menopause before the age of 45 have a higher risk. And you also learned that the more sudden your menopause, the higher your risk. So menopause that results from surgery, removing both ovaries, chemotherapy, or radiation therapy is associated with the higher risk? Well, if you consider all of these things, it would make perfect sense that estrogen replacement might just be an option for preventing Alzheimer's. And indeed it is. And that's what this video is all about. Do you see how facts make sense? So let's address the particulars of estrogen replacement as a means of preventing Alzheimer's. But notice that I keep saying estrogen replacement. And I'm saying that because I want you to be absolutely sure that you realize progesterone has little or nothing to do with improving your brain. The hormonal medication option for preventing Alzheimer's is estrogen. It's all about estrogen. Do not make the huge mistake of thinking that progesterone can do for your brain what estrogen can do for your brain. It cannot and it will not. So if you have to take progesterone with estrogen to prevent uterine cancer, that's fine. But know that you're taking the progesterone for your uterus, not your brain. You know, it's like these two hormones are security guards for different organs. Estrogen protects your brain, heart, and bones. Progesterone protects your uterus. So let's delve into the logistics behind why estrogen is the hormonal medication option for preventing Alzheimer's. In gynecology, we have something called your menstrual life. Your menstrual life is a formula for calculating the number of menstrual cycles you've had in your lifetime. And the reason anyone ever came up with it in the first place is because gynecologists noticed that certain disease rates were affected by a woman's menstrual life. Basically, your menstrual life just adds up all the years you were having periods. And since pregnancy and breastfeeding are huge interruptions in your periods, you subtract the months you were pregnant or breastfeeding from the total number. So, the basic equation for calculating your menstrual life is your age at post-menopause, which is when you lost your estrogen, minus the age at which you had your first period. And you get an answer. That gives you the number of years that you had menstrual cycles overall. But then you have to realize that you actually have 13 periods each year. Yes, it is 13, not 12. And since we're interested in your menstrual life, we need to multiply the answer by 13. So now the equation becomes your age at postmenopause, which is when you lost your estrogen, minus your age when you had your first period, which gives you an answer, and you multiply the answer by 13. So now we have the correct number of menstrual cycles you've had in your life. If we ignore all your months of pregnancy and all your months of breastfeeding. Now, if you've never been pregnant and you've never breastfed, then your answer is finished. You have an answer now. That's your menstrual life. But if you have ever been pregnant or ever breastfed, we want to account for those. So, we take the answer we currently have and we subtract the number of months of pregnancy and breastfeeding. So now our equation becomes your age at postmenopause, which is when you lost your estrogen, minus the age at which you had your first period, which is the answer, and then you multiply that by 13. Okay, so now you take that and you subtract the number of months in which you were pregnant, and from that number you subtract the number of months you spent breastfeeding. And the final answer is your menstrual life. That gives us an accurate menstrual life. Now, depending on all these parameters for you, the final number is probably going to be in the range of between about 350 and 450 menstrual cycles in your entire lifetime. Now, the reason I'm telling you about your menstrual life is that certain aspects of it have a significant bearing on your risk for Alzheimer's. And it helps you see how using estrogen as a management option makes sense. It turns out that the more menstrual cycles you've had, the lower your risk for Alzheimer's. In other words, the higher your menstrual life, the lower your Alzheimer's risk. Or the higher that final answer of that equation, the lower your risk for Alzheimer's. So, having your first period at a younger age lowers your risk. And having your last period at an older age lowers your risk. This is why I put so much emphasis on premature menopause. If you become postmenopausal at or before the age of 45, it increases your risk for Alzheimer's by 28%. Obviously, if you've had a hysterectomy or a uterine ablation and you stop having your periods before you stop producing estrogen, then this equation is less meaningful. Your cycles may still be there, but it's more difficult for you to count them. But what this means is that the longer your body is exposed to estrogen, the lower your risk for Alzheimer's. Now, the other factor pertinent to and included in the menstrual life equation is your pregnancies. And it turns out that the more pregnancies you've had, the lower your risk for Alzheimer's. And the fewer pregnancies you've had, the higher your risk for Alzheimer's. Women who have had 3 or more children are, on average, about 12% less likely to develop Alzheimer's than women who have had only 1 child. What this means is that the higher the levels of estrogen you have had in your body, the more protected your brain is from Alzheimer's. And the lower the levels of estrogen you've had in your body, the less protected your brain is from Alzheimer's. So if you look at the cumulative effect of all of this, it becomes readily apparent that your brain loves estrogen. And the fact is that not only does your brain function its very best when you have estrogen, it also functions best when the estrogen levels are high. So that brings us to the use of estrogen replacement for preventing Alzheimer's. There have been many studies on the effect of estrogen on both cognition in general and on Alzheimer's in particular. And while there is no question that estrogen improves brain function in women, studies addressing the effects of HRT on brain function in postmenopausal women are inconsistent. Inconsistent means that they do not all show the same results. Video number 252 was all about research studies on Alzheimer's and HRT. And in that video, you learned that there is a long list of risk factors that affect a research study. They include all of the following: study design, objectives of the study, characteristics of the study population, size of the study population, duration of the study, the actual conclusions, how well the conclusions pertain to the objectives, climate of HRT use at the time, and limitations of the study. Needless to say, all studies of HRT on brain function in postmenopausal women have not all been the same with regard to any of these factors. In fact, they have been so variable that it's a stretch to even say that they were all studying the same thing. Most of them involved something called confounding variables. Confounding variables include anything that can skew the results of a study. The most basic confounding variable is failure to distinguish between hormone replacement with estrogen alone versus estrogen plus progesterone. Most studies actually do separate them, but when they present the results to you, the public, they just lump them all together under the term HRT. And that fails to give you the truth about the magnitude of estrogen's effect on preventing Alzheimer's. All studies show that estrogen alone definitely decreases your risk of Alzheimer's. Progesterone does not negate that benefit, but it does cloud the issue. Beyond that, there are many other things that constitute confounding variables. For instance, if you want to determine if estrogen can prevent Alzheimer's in postmenopausal women, you have to study only women who don't already have Alzheimer's. But it's difficult to ensure that all the study participants are free of Alzheimer's simply because Alzheimer's doesn't manifest until after the plaques and tangles I taught you about in video 242 have been present for quite some time. So if you assume a woman is Alzheimer's free, but she actually has very early disease, and you give her HRT, you end up studying something very different than what you set out to study. Instead of being a study on whether estrogen can prevent Alzheimer's, it becomes a study on whether HRT can treat Alzheimer's. But the researchers won't realize that since they don't know her Alzheimer's was already there. So their conclusion may be that the HRT caused her Alzheimer's. See, this is a very frustrating situation with any disease that manifests symptoms long after the disease has begun. So rather than letting any study sway your understanding of estrogen for prevention of Alzheimer's, please go with logic. If you start with logic, you can find flaws in all the studies, and the logic serves to explain the inconsistent results. If you go about it in the opposite order, all you're left with is confusion. So the logic is this. If we know that estrogen improves the functioning of your brain throughout your reproductive life, why would it be any different when you reach your non-reproductive life? You still have the same brain. It still has the same estrogen receptors. And the only difference is that your own body isn't producing the estrogen it needs to fill those receptors. Your menstrual life calculation demonstrated that the longer your brain is exposed to estrogen, the lower your risk for Alzheimer's. And as long as your own body produces estrogen, you prevent Alzheimer's. So it's logical to conclude that if you take HRT after your body stops producing its own estrogen, and you further extend the time your brain is exposed to estrogen, you will continue to prevent Alzheimer's. And despite the fact that this is the case, you will find studies with conclusions that span the gamut and confuse you, all because of confounding variables. One of the most common confounding variables is studying women who start HRT before they lose their own estrogen, along with women who start HRT years after losing their own estrogen. But the study just lumps them all together. And what this does is mix women who do not have the beginnings of Alzheimer's with those who do. And when some of the ones who already had Alzheimer's show symptoms of Alzheimer's, the conclusion is that HRT didn't prevent it. Another common confounding variable is failing to account for any of the lifestyle measures that can prevent Alzheimer's. They're powerful, so powerful that they might be able to sway the results of a study. For example, if one group of women takes HRT at the beginning of postmenopause but also practices none of the lifestyle measures, and that group is compared to another group of women that does not take HRT but does practice all the lifestyle measures, the results could be equal for both. That could mean that the HRT did not make a difference. Or it could mean that there's more than one way to prevent Alzheimer's. And still another common confounding variable is failing to account for genetic differences. And as you saw in video 248, genetic mutations for Alzheimer's differ greatly. And depending on the mutation, They can add to your risk for Alzheimer's or subtract from your risk for Alzheimer's. So be very careful when you hear about any study on Alzheimer's. I guarantee you are not hearing the whole story, unless you hear it from me. So never, ever, ever use a single study as your guide. The fact is that HRT is definitely one of your very best options for preventing Alzheimer's. And this is true regardless of whatever other management options you employ. But there are some particular requirements that have to be met for estrogen to prevent Alzheimer's. And they have to do with timing and dosage. And that's what I'll address in the next video. What you've learned today is that your risk for Alzheimer's is directly related to your brain's exposure to estrogen. The longer the duration and the higher the levels of estrogen, the lower your risk for Alzheimer's. Continuing estrogen exposure to your brain post-menopause in the form of HRT just extends that protection. But come back next week to get the details of what that entails. Please schedule a consultation at menopausetailor.me. You'll be so glad you did. It could save your brain. Definitely subscribe, and following me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram is optional. Bye!